So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Supervisor Gordon Mar, whom many of you know has represented the Sunset since 2019. He is a longtime community activist, legal activist, tenants' rights activist, and served on the board. Joel Engardio is a former journalist, which I appreciate personally, and has been involved in a number of issues, including most recently a major role in the school board recall, and also with his Stop Crime SF group. So with that, we will get started. I will alternate who gets to go first. So just randomly, I'm going to ask Joel to start out with his opening statement.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Engardio, and I believe San Francisco's best days are ahead. So I know it's been frustrating living here when things seem to be going in the wrong direction, but I'm not giving up. I'm offering a change in direction. It's time to replace the status quo. And the first step is getting the basics right. Safer streets, better schools, more middle-income housing, and vibrant small businesses. I came to San Francisco more than 20 years ago to take a job as a journalist. I wanted to advocate for people who don't feel heard. I was raised by a single mom. She cleaned houses for a living. She didn't have much money or education, but she taught me how to get things done with the resources we had. My husband, Lionel, he grew up in Taiwan. He grew up in poverty under martial law. And today he's a software engineer in Silicon Valley. So we have lived the San Francisco dream. And that's why I know our city is worth fixing. San Francisco can realize its full potential if we listen to what residents say they need. And that's why I helped lead the school board recall. Parents and kids were suffering. They needed schools reopened, not renamed. I lead a group called Stop Crime SF. I believe in criminal justice reform. But for it to succeed, residents must feel safe, and victims cannot be ignored. My in-laws are afraid to visit San Francisco. It shouldn't have to be that way. And that's why I supported the recall of Chesa Boudin. I believe we deserve a district attorney who will prosecute crime and always put victims first. So there's a lot to fix in San Francisco, and I know it can feel daunting, but I want to remind you that I still see a lot of joy in our city. The joy of our natural beauty and our people and the food, the amazing food. So always remember the joy. It's what keeps me going. I am proud to be endorsed by State Senator Scott Wiener and a bunch of great Democratic clubs. The Chinese American Democratic Club, Edley Asian Pacific Democratic Club, the Alice Toklas LGBTQ Democratic Club, and the United Democratic Club. I am a forward-thinking, practical Democrat, and that means I embrace innovation, and I'm focused on data-driven results and common-sense solutions. My name is Joel Engardio, and I'm running for supervisor so we can create our best San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel.
Great. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the SF Standard for organizing this forum, and to United Irish Cultural Center for hosting us. And thanks, everybody, for being here. I actually want to just start by thanking District 4 voters for selecting me to represent you 4 years ago in quite a bit more a crowded field. And also to say that it has been the privilege of my lifetime representing District 4 and our wonderful neighborhoods, families, and seniors. And I'm running for a second term to keep moving District 4 forward. I have fought for working people over big corporations. I have fought for our neighborhoods over downtown interests. I have fought for our fair share in funding and services, and I want to keep fighting for you. And I'm extremely proud of what I've accomplished in my first term, working hand in hand with many of you and with the Sunset District community on our top issues of concern. We've worked together to keep our neighborhoods safer by creating the Sunset District 5-point Community Safety Plan. We've worked together to support our schools by securing $8 million in new funding for college and career readiness programs for high school students and science, technology, and math grants for all District 4 schools. We've worked together to address our housing affordability crisis by securing historic investments in affordable housing in the Sunset for our teachers, families, and seniors. And we've worked together to preserve and enhance our unique quality of life, really what makes the Sunset. And we've created the Outer Sunset Farmers Market and Mercantile and the Sunset Chinese Cultural District. I first ran for supervisor because I want my daughter to be able to afford to live in the city and the neighborhood she's growing up in. with clean and safe streets and a good quality of life. And I'm running again to continue that work so that the character of our neighborhood, where working class people can afford to buy a home and raise a family, can be protected. The Sunset deserves a supervisor who builds consensus and finds compromise within our neighborhood while being uncompromising in fighting for our neighborhood. And the Sunset deserves a supervisor and really a voice at City Hall that actually lives in the Sunset. Someone who has deep roots and a record of accomplishments for our neighborhood. So I'm extremely proud to be that voice, and I'm even prouder of what we've accomplished in my first term and what we will accomplish in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mar. So we'll start out on one of the big hot button issues, which is housing. San Francisco is a housing crisis. As everybody knows, there's not enough housing. And D4, District 4, in fact, this year, according to the DBI, has the fewest construction permits of any district in the city, has generally been quite resistant to new housing. So the question I wanted to ask is a two-part question. So one is, what is your plan to assure that D4 builds its fair share of housing? And this goes to what you mentioned, Mr. Mar, about your daughter being able to afford to live here, right? That's part of the question. Housing supply is very important. So what would you do to ensure that housing is built in District 4? And then secondly, do you think do you think the current processes and the way that the Board of Supervisors intervenes in housing projects, as it did with the Stevenson Street project, which you opposed, is that an appropriate role for the Board of Supervisors? So that's a two-part question. I'll start with you, Mr. Mar.
Well, housing affordability is certainly continues to be one of the most challenging issues, facing our city, across all neighborhoods and all communities. It has, again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and in my track record that I have in my first term, expanding housing in the Sunset District and on the West Side, and housing that really meets the priority needs of our community has been one of my top priorities. So besides championing the first ever 100% affordable housing developments in the Sunset, one of them for our educators, teachers, and paraprofessionals, which we're going to be breaking ground on, Mayor Breed and I and others next week over at 43rd and Judah. That's incredibly important. And then also the neighborhoods, or the district's first ever affordable housing development for low and moderate income families on Irving Street. And these are exactly the kind of folks that have made the Sunset District such a wonderful community, working class and middle class families for generations, but are currently priced out of the market. I've also been working to support homeowners to expand their homes to meet their needs of their extended families, friends, and the broader community by adding accessory dwelling units. And also now with SB 9 as a law in the state, by looking at expanding their homes to create duplexes. So I sponsored legislation to waive building permit fees for new accessory dwelling unit construction. And I also created the District 4 accessory dwelling unit pilot program, which provided technical assistance to 30 homeowners here in the Sunset who wanted to take the first step in exploring and creating an ADU for their extended family. And then finally, I sponsored legislation earlier this year that was unanimously passed by the Board of Supervisors, the Housing Development Incentive Program for homeowners that expands the District 4 accessory dwelling unit program citywide and scales it up to provide technical assistance and financing for homeowners that want to expand their homes, not just with ADUs, but now with SB 9 as law, duplexes as well. So I feel that expanding housing in the Sunset with a focus on affordability and livability in the neighborhood those have been my guiding principles and a key priority for me in my first term, and I'll continue to make that a priority in my second term.
Thank you. Mr. Engardio?
The residents of San Francisco and the Sunset have real housing needs. If you want your adult children or grandchildren to stay in the city, we're going to need to build some housing. If you're a senior and you want to have an option to downsize or age safely in place in an elevator building, we need to have those options. But it's one thing to say that we need housing for teachers and families and our children, but the action is more important. Because Gordon Mar, he didn't answer the question, he voted against housing on an empty downtown parking lot. 500 units of housing, 100 which would have been affordable housing. So you're killing and giving away affordable housing that could have been used for teachers and families and our kids. So I think it's important to actually put your vote where your mouth is and say that we do need housing and we're going to make housing easier for people to build. And the thing about the Gordon Mar earlier this year tried to do legislation to allow for duplexes and fourplexes on single family homes, the lots in the Sunset and throughout San Francisco. And the planning department said this was well intentioned, but the way it's drafted, so many terms and conditions, it actually won't create any affordable housing. So if we're going to craft legislation so a property owner can make the most out of their property for their family wealth and create a duplex, let's make it so they can actually do it and benefit from it. So I think that would be the win-win situation.
You have a response?
Yeah, I guess regarding the project on Stevenson that Jonathan and Joel referred to, yes, I did support the appeal to the Board of Supervisors of the environmental impact report because I felt like it was an inadequate environmental impact report on that project, but that didn't kill the project. It just sent it back to the Planning Commission to do a more thorough EIR on that project. And I think that's extremely important as we move ahead with new development, whether it's in South of Market or the Sunset District, that there's really thorough and adequate environmental review of these projects. Additionally, I think over the last decade, the housing development in our city has been extremely imbalanced, and we've overbuilt specifically one type of housing, and that's luxury condos, and we've grossly underbuilt housing for families, for seniors, and housing that's affordable to moderate and middle income households. And I think the project on Stevenson is another example of that. It was just another large luxury condo development, packing as many units as the developer could into that site. And we even see an example here in the Sunset District, the Westerly, literally right across the street here. That project was completed 3 years ago. Many of the units there are still unsold after 3 years, and all of the retail space is still vacant in that project. So I believe we need to build housing, yes, absolutely, but we need to build housing that meets the needs of our communities and not just the bottom lines of the developers.
Engardio?
And on that Stevenson project, it's an empty parking lot. It's valet parking for Nordstrom shoppers. That is the perfect place to put market rate housing for tech workers because it was going to generate fees to create 100 units of affordable housing. We had to give up 100 units of affordable housing because the supervisors refused to build on an empty parking lot because they don't believe in market rate housing. Market rate housing helps pay for affordable housing. Where else is it going to come from? Federal government? Where is the money to the public funds? We need to be creative and find ways to build all types of housing so we can actually meet the needs of our residents.
If I could just follow up on one point. I mean, you'd mentioned earlier Scott Wiener's support for you, and I know, Mr. Mar, you'd been opposed to his housing initiatives, which are basically statewide efforts to encourage more housing construction. And do both of you agree that there should be more housing built in the Sunset, that this is a responsibility of this neighborhood to support more housing?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that was one of the driving forces in me deciding to take the step of shifting from being a community and labor organizer for over 25 years in our city to seek this position 4 years ago, is absolutely we need to build more housing in our city and on the west side and even in District 4. And that's what I've been working on, affordable housing, supporting homeowners to expand their homes to meet the needs of their extended families, their family members, and to generate rental income. And there's a lot more. Actually, in my first term, there have been 8 new multifamily developments that have either been constructed, entitled, or proposed in the Sunset District, and that's a pretty historic amount of new housing in the Sunset.
How many units in those?
I don't know the total number of units, but it's hundreds. It's a start. I mean, prior to when I started as supervisor, there had been very little housing built here. So, but I think we have to build housing in a balanced way and ensuring that we're following our RENA goals, which should be the majority affordable housing, over market rate housing. And we need to be building housing for families, seniors, and moderate and middle income folks that we just haven't done in the past decade, with our sole focus on luxury condos.
And yeah, absolutely, we need to build housing all types in all parts of the city. That's the only way it's going to work. The danger here is Governor Newsom has been a real hard line on this in making San Francisco follow its housing element. And he's saying he will force us to do it, or we risk losing our local control. We don't want that. So we need to make sure that we're doing our part in building housing where it makes sense. I mean, let's just start on the transit corridors. We haven't even done that yet. Do you know West Portal Avenue? I mean, there's a beautiful Art Deco building at the very end of West Portal Avenue. It's 5 or 6 stories. It was been there 100 years. And that was the original vision of that avenue with the trains coming out of the tunnel. And in the 1980s, it was downzoned to a single story. So here you have an avenue served by 3 trains with just single story retail. That is a perfect place to build housing that matches the character of the original vision from 100 years ago. So there is a way to build housing that fits our beautiful West Side character and helps the residents who are here. People do have real housing needs, longtime residents, not just luxury condo owners and tech workers. Not that there's anything wrong with tech workers. My husband is one. But I'm just saying longtime residents have needs and we're not meeting them. So let's do that. And I'm dedicated to meeting those needs.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to another very hot button issue, public safety. Mr. Engardio, you were very active in the recall of Chesa Boudin. I'm curious what each of you think about the current district attorney's race. Do you support Brooke Jenkins? And what are the key things that you would do to improve public safety in the city?
Yeah, I definitely support Brooke Jenkins. I think people really liked the fact that out of the gate, she said 2 important things. She said, I'm going to focus on Asian hate and discrimination and attacks against Asian seniors, and I'm going to prosecute the drug dealers. That is so important. Chesa Boudin did not prosecute any of those fentanyl dealers who killed 1,700 people, record number overdose deaths. They were peddling death, and they should be held accountable for that. The drug users should be given treatment, but I think the dealers need to be prosecuted, and I'm glad to see Brooke Jenkins finally taking that step.
Thanks. Mr. Mar?
And since Brooke Jenkins stepped into the role as district attorney, we've had a number of good meetings together, and we're committed to working together on our shared interests on preventing crime, supporting victims, and also addressing hate crimes in our city, which I've been a major, the increase in hate crimes against the Asian American community and others in our city, which I've been a major advocate and leader on the Board of Supervisors in our city around. But I think that the focus on prosecution of crimes, we certainly need to hold perpetrators of crime accountable for their actions. But I've been focused, my focus has been more on preventing crime before it happens as the best way to ensure that our neighborhoods, including here in the Sunset, are safe. And some of this is from just the reality that the police department has about a 9% clearance rate on crime incidents in our city. So that means 91% of the crimes that happen in our city, the district attorney will not even be able to take a role in prosecution or action on those cases. So again, I've been focused on preventing crime, the Sunset District 5-point community safety plan that I worked on with community organizations and SFPD to roll out over the last year or two is one good example, and I feel like we become a model for community-based solutions to safety and keeping our neighborhoods safe here in the Sunset District. And I also sponsored citywide legislation, or legislation to take what we're doing here in the Sunset citywide, and that's a crime prevention through Community Policing Act, which the board adopted three months ago, that now requires each district police station to come up with a community policing plan that includes expanded foot patrols and also language access strategies, working in collaboration with the neighborhood.
And so who do you support in the DA race?
I haven't made an endorsement. At this point, I would leave it up to the voters to decide who's best to lead as district attorney. But again, I've been working very have a very strong collaborative relationship building with District Attorney Brooke Jenkins. I look forward to continuing to work with her if she is reelected or elected by the voters.
Yeah, if you like working with Brooke Jenkins, just endorse her, because the other options are abysmal. I mean, what kind of city are we going to have if Brooke Jenkins is not the DA? I mean, do you really seriously think that the other two are going to do a good job? So it's just important to take a stand and stand up for the residents of the Sunset who were so frustrated and upset about the state of crime in our city. And I want to say, I agree that we should do whatever we can to prevent crime in the first place. I do not advocate going back to 1990s style, lock them up, throw away the key. Absolutely not. We should invest in diversion programs, do everything we can, invest in education, all the social programs so we don't have crime in the first place. But we don't live in a utopia. And there are bad people out there, and the drug dealers who are dealing this fentanyl and killing 1,700 people in our streets, they need to be held accountable. There is a role for prosecuting crime. You know, when Grandpa Vicha was murdered, our district attorney at the time, Chesa Boudin, excused it in the New York Times and said, oh, the suspect was having a temper tantrum. That is horrible to say, horrible. And you appeared in I Stand with Chesa Boudin ads at that time during that recall. So why were you appearing in I Stand with Chesa Boudin ads? I mean, you endorsed him from the very start. You endorsed him over great candidates like Nancy Tung, who would have served our city well. So I just want to say that it's important for a supervisor to really have the backs of the residents, and that's what I will do.
Mr. Mar, do you have a response?
Yeah, again, I'm developing a very good working relationship with DA Jenkins, and I look forward to continuing that and around our shared goals of preventing crime, supporting victims, and also holding perpetrators accountable for their crimes. But again, I think it's a very simplistic and really, I think, politically charged focus on prosecution as the main way to address the very real and broad public safety concerns in our city. My focus has been on preventing crime and through community policing, through expanding foot patrols here in the Sunset and throughout the city. And I'm going to continue to do that. And we really have to address the root causes of crime as well. That means addressing the drug addiction crisis that's been plaguing our streets and our communities. Addressing, homelessness and the housing affordability crisis and these other issues as well. So prosecution, yes, and having a district attorney that is willing to stand up and take a firmer stand, on these cases, certainly. But but we need a lot more than that to really address the real concerns around public safety that exist.
Okay, thank you. So to get to another rather divisive issue, especially one especially important here in the Sunset, relating to the JFK Drive and the Great Highway, and whether cars should be allowed on them and when. So this is a straightforward issue. There's two propositions on the ballot, I and K, one of which would open up both roads, including the Great Highway all the way south, which had not really previously been contemplated. So do you support Prop I or Prop K? And what is your position, as you would state it, on the opening of those roads?
I'm sorry, you said K? I
think it's I and K, right?
J?
I and J.
Might be J.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I could start it. Yeah, I've been kind of dealing with these issues very intensively, as district court supervisor for the last several years. I oppose Prop I and support J. My main reason for that is Prop I would, by permanently opening the southern stretch of the Great Highway or the Great Highway Annex to cars, or keep maintaining that as a roadway, it would undo over a decade of work that has happened in the city, particularly out here on the west side, to address the erosion of that roadway, the severe erosion of the Great Highway Annex, and the impacts of climate change on our western coast. And also Prop I would also, the controller's analysis found that it would cost the city over $80 million, around $80 million of new expenses if we undo that 10 years of planning that's happened and that's really the Ocean Beach Climate Change Adaptation Project. Additionally, I oppose Prop I because it would take away what I feel like is a popular compromise that we've been able to reach on the Great Highway that I worked with Mayor Breed and others on, where you all know, last August, we reopened the Great Highway to cars on weekdays so people can really get to work, get their kids to school during the week, while also maintaining it as a unique and very popular recreational space on the weekends when people have more time to actually use it to recreate. So I think that compromise has been has worked out really well. It's very much supported here in the Sunset District. And so that's another reason why I oppose Prop I, and I do support Prop J, because they would keep the Great Highway, all the work that's been done over the last 10 years to address the climate change impacts on the southern stretch of the Great Highway, and also it would allow us to keep this popular compromise in place on the main stretch of the Great Highway.
Mr. Engardio?
So take note, here is the one time, or maybe there's more than one, Gordon and I agree that we are opposed to Prop I and in favor of Prop J. And let me just say a little bit about Prop I. Prop I is if you want to look at it through a fiscal lens, it's actually fiscally irresponsible because it's forcing that southern extension to remain a road when it's literally falling into the ocean. You're never going to win that battle against Mother Nature. You're going to pour millions and millions of untold millions into it. And I'd rather spend that money on something more tangible, useful. We definitely could use it. So for that reason, it's fiscally irresponsible. And it also eliminates what is a very popular, the weekend park at the Great Highway. So it eliminates that and takes away any possibility of a permanent park. So for those reasons, Prop I is just not a well-crafted legislation. Prop J, I do want to make a note about Prop J. I suggest and encourage everyone to please vote yes on Prop N. J and N really need to go together because J is allowing for kids to ride their bikes on JFK Drive. But for that to truly work, N is allowing for that underground parking garage to be more accessible to seniors and people with disabilities so they also can have access to the amenities of the park. So you really need both to work together. So I would encourage saying yes on J and N.
And do you support Supervisor Mar's compromise on the Great Highway?
Oh, yes.
No, I mean, I'm asking
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Engardio if he supports that compromise. In other words,
Yeah, I support
cars.
Yes.
Cars during the week and not on weekends.
That's right. Yes, I support the compromise.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to another a big issue for the city. We had a story a week or so ago about the pending crash in commercial real estate in downtown San Francisco. It's a pretty giant overhang. I mean, workers are not going back to work. The value of those buildings is plummeting, and a lot of the commerce downtown is really devastated. So this is a complicated issue, but I wonder, first of all, what proposals you would have. I mean, there's different ways to look at this, but some people say, well, the business taxes are way too high and too complicated and need to be simplified. Maybe the city needs to spend some giant amounts of money on a reinventing downtown plan. I mean, I haven't heard any real great ideas, but I'm just curious what the two of you think is the proper way to address that crisis.
The downtown of San Francisco was really like a 1990s model before the pandemic. 9 to 5 commute, kind of a ghost town at night. People are there for working and lunch, and it's very bustling during the day. That's gone. So we can't magically bring that back. So we're going to need to reinvent what the downtown is. It's akin to, I've heard it compared to when 9/11 hit lower Manhattan and it was decimated. And the only way and prior to 9/11, downtown New York was similar. The finance jobs came in during the day and everyone left at night. So when you go there today, you see a vibrant community in Battery Park. Lots of housing was built. People are now living there. It's their community. And so then it creates parks and creates dining, and people are there all weekend. And so I think we need to take that example and apply that to downtown San Francisco and completely reimagine it. And that's going to mean reconfiguring streets and making promenades. So it's something where people are drawn to want to go there, not just to work, but for experiences and entertainment and dining, and also creating housing there. And there's an opportunity where the governor is telling us, you need to build 80,000 units of housing, otherwise we're going to lose local control. Well, here's a great opportunity. Let's repurpose some of those office buildings and make them housing. So like, there's just so much opportunity. And I know everyone is scared and running around, hair on fire. Oh my gosh, the world is ending. But yes, it's scary. But in that, we should look at the opportunity and really be creative about what the future is going to be. And we can create the downtown that works for us. And do I have a little bit more time to go along with that?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. To go along with that, we need to really roll out the red carpet to every entrepreneur and artisan that is around the world. And we need to say, San Francisco is a place where if you have a good idea, we're going to let you incubate it, and we're going to encourage it. And maybe it's the one that saves our local economy. Because right now, City Hall doesn't have that attitude. We tend to kind of, it doesn't fit that box, and therefore we squelch it and kill it. And we have to get rid of that mindset and allow for the germination of any great idea.
As we finally emerge from the extreme challenges of the past two plus years, the future of downtown is one of the most important issues that we face as a city, and I think I think we have to accept the reality that it is going to be quite different than it had been, especially in the past decade during the tech-driven boom that has played out. And with remote work and hybrid work, that's going to be continuing and a permanent feature, I think, for a lot of the tech businesses as well as other office businesses. But we certainly need to do everything we can to bring back the workers to downtown, and because that represents such an important part of our economy, and it's really been the engine of our economic growth over the last decade. I wouldn't support looking at tax breaks or tax handouts to do that like we did coming out of the last recession, because I feel, and I've held hearings on this at the Board of Supervisors, the so-called Twitter tax break that was used, where it ended up just being a handout of tens of millions of dollars to a small number of companies, and it provided very little benefit to the broader community. But I do think one thing that needs to happen is the commercial landlords need to look at lowering their lease rates, so that they can't continue to be charging and getting the highest lease rates in the world here in San Francisco. And by lowering the lease rates, it's going to attract other types of businesses that haven't been able to afford paying the exorbitant rents over the past decades. So it'll create a more diverse, I think, a diverse economy, a business economy in downtown. And I think we also really do need to look at converting vacant office space downtown to housing and other community serving purposes like cultural centers. I know that's challenging from a technical standpoint, and I've had conversations actually with Thomas Soper here in the audience, as well as others, about this. But I do think that's going to help. That will help revitalize downtown as well, just bringing more residents down there rather than office workers who most of whom leave the area at night. And would also go a long way for us being able to meet our large arena goal that's now been imposed on us by the state.
So if I could follow up on that for a minute. So you said the city should encourage companies to bring their office workers back, but shouldn't offer any incentives to do that. So how does that work?
I think I definitely would support creative incentives for businesses to bring their workers back, and especially for new businesses with lower commercial lease rates to be able to open in San Francisco or come back to the city. I just wouldn't support tax breaks on the line of the Twitter tax break, because that was a failure for our city.
And how are you going to encourage? I mean, it is capitalism, right? So landlords aren't just going to cut the rates because you ask them to. So what are you going to do to promote the reduction of rents that you were suggesting would be a solution?
Well, I think the commercial landlords are going to, they're facing the reality that the demand for all the commercial office space right now, currently in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco, has plummeted. right? So I think they're going to have to respond to that, just as businesses. And I don't know that the city needs to do anything to do that. I'm just pointing out that if commercial office lease rates go down, I believe it will allow opportunities for other types of businesses that couldn't afford the lease rates over the past decade to start up here, to move here, or to return to San Francisco. And that will be healthy for our economy because it'll create a more diverse more diverse economy here in San Francisco.
And Mr. Engardio, you said you talked about the transformation downtown, creating boulevards and housing. That all costs a lot of money. So do you think the city, taxpayers should invest significant sums in the redevelopment of downtown?
Well, we have a $14 billion budget, so I mean, maybe we can.
Yeah, many demands on it though. So
many demands on it, but
is this particular thing a top priority for you?
Well, the death of downtown seems like a pretty important topic and seems like an essential function of a city. So I think if you're in a crisis moment, we need to really prioritize what is not working in San Francisco, and maybe we need to focus on the basics and getting those functioning. And if downtown is dying, then that's red alert to me. So I think we can prioritize that. And I think we also need to make sure that we are not killing the golden goose, so to speak, as we've attempted to do so often in San Francisco. Do you know before the pandemic, in 2019, that was a boom year, by the way, right? 500 restaurants closed in San Francisco before the pandemic. Why were they closing? Because we, City Hall, the bureaucracy was killing small business, strangling them with so much fees and regulation, red tape. If you wanted to expand your business or try something new, it was just roadblock after roadblock. You read those stories in the Chronicle and other publications, great publications like the SF Standard, that talk about how a small business owner couldn't even get an ice cream shop opened. I mean, we need to change our attitude. For the longest time, we could squeeze as much as we wanted out of business because we just assumed they're always going to want to be here. The times have changed, and so there's other alternatives, and we need to be welcoming to make sure that our economy survives.
And if I could just follow up to both of you, because this is an important point. So all the fees and taxes and red tape and all these kinds of things that make it difficult to operate a small business here. I mean, Mr. Engardio, I think from what you said, you agree that that's something the city needs to address?
Oh, more than address, like roll it back. Roll out the red carpet
Mr.
and
Mar,
roll back the red tape.
What's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and especially for our small businesses that are the lifeblood of our neighborhoods and our city, and really our economy. And there's been so much focus on the tech sector and figuring out ways that we could keep these big wealthy corporations in our city, and that's important because they're an important part of our economy, even in our tax base, which funds our services. But it's really the small businesses that have struggled the most during the pandemic, and here in the Sunset and throughout the city that really need more of a break. And the city has taken a lot of steps during the pandemic to waive the fees that particularly small businesses pay. We created and I co-sponsored the first year free program, where it waives all the fees, the new business fees for a new business that opens up. We have legislation now to continue that program. So definitely focus on continuing to streamline permitting and cut fees and taxes on our small businesses. And this is work that I have been doing along with my colleagues and the mayor's office and the Office of Economic and Workforce Development.
Thank you. Okay, just for our last topic before we move to the next segment of questioning. So homelessness is an issue that people always say is one of the most important ones facing the city. And I want to ask one specific question about that, which is, do you support the city shifting its policy to essentially building enough shelter beds for everyone so that it could legally prohibit people from sleeping on the street, which is kind of one proposal that's out there? Or do you think the city should continue to prioritize investment in permanent supportive housing rather than temporary shelters?
So I think that's me, right?
Yeah.
Well, I co-sponsored the legislation that the board just passed, calling for the creation of a plan to create enough shelter or transitional housing for everyone that's currently living on the street. So I absolutely support that. I support it because we need it, right? We just can't continue to allow people to live on the streets and without being able to provide them with an alternative, with a bed and sheltered housing. So I absolutely support that.
And do you also support the kind of parallel idea that people should be required to go indoors one way or the other? Like if they're drug addicts, they need treatment. If they're mental health, they need to be in a hospital. And if they're simply indigent, they need to be in a shelter.
Yeah, well, I think we'll be able to take a firmer hand on getting people who are living on the streets or even in the vehicles out on the lower grade highway and scattered throughout our neighborhood into shelter and transitional housing when we have those beds available. So I absolutely believe that will allow us the opportunity to take a firmer hand on.
And like the care courts, nuisance care courts, do you support that idea, the mandatory treatment?
Yes, I do. Yes, the Cal courts I think is an important initiative, and I will be actively working on implementing it here in San Francisco with my colleagues.
Okay, great, thank you. Engardio?
So it's important to note that homelessness is a housing problem. And so we do need to build all types of housing, from the tiny home concept all the way up to the market rate housing concept. So there's a whole menu of housing options. So in that ecosystem, you need all the elements. And it's just untenable to have people living in a tent on the sidewalk. It's not good for the person in the tent, and it's not good for the person walking down the sidewalk. So we need to provide shelter space and beds so people are, at the very minimum, are not on a tent on the sidewalk. So that's really important. The other thing that I want to point out is there are a large number of homeless people suffering from severe mental illness. And State Senator Scott Wiener got a law passed at the state level to strengthen something called conservatorship law, which compels someone who's suffering on the street to get the treatment they need. And the counties have to opt into that, and our Board of Supervisors watered down the law so much that only 2 people were helped in the first 3 years. And Gordon Mar was one of the supervisors to water down that law. So how is that helping people? If people are suffering and dying on the street, we need to use every tool we can to give them the help they need. It's not progressive to let someone just suffer and die on the street. We need to have a balance. I'm not saying go back to the days of insane asylums and one flew over the cuckoo's nest, but we've gone so far in the other direction that people are dying on the street. There's a balance, and we need to move it back. And that's why when I said I'm proud to be endorsed by Scott Wiener, and I heard some people kind of hiss and boo about that, but Scott Wiener is not a one single person. He has done a lot of legislation, including that conservatorship law, which I think a lot of people in the Sunset will be glad to know about. And it's important to know that we need better supervisors who can opt into the full version of that law, because our current crop of supervisors watered it down.
Well, I just want to make it clear that I supported the conservatorship legislation. I do support this important strategy to help people that who are living on the streets and definitely need services and support, but are not able to help themselves. But I also wanted to talk about homelessness in District 4, just because I wanted to bring this ground it more in what we're experiencing here as Sunset District residents, and maybe in your outreach in the neighborhood, you've seen it, Joel. But the District 4 had the highest increase in homelessness of any district based on the city's latest point in time count. So that was a count that happened in January of this year, and the unsheltered population increased by 138% in District 4, when it went down in some other neighborhoods. And even though we still have, that's on a percentage basis, but numbers wise, we still have one of the lowest numerically homeless population of any district. But I just wanted to raise that because I know I've been really dealing with a lot of you here in the audience and the neighborhood around the growth of people living in RVs and vehicles on the lower grade highway and also scattered throughout the district. And it had become particularly untenable on the 2 blocks between Lincoln and Judah. And there were major public safety and public health concerns for the 24 RVs that had created an encampment there. So I've been working with 6 city departments, really trying to push them to be more responsive to community concerns about this situation, and really for the first time convening, these departments to work in a coordinated way, because there's Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, there's a police department, there's Department of Public Works, Rec and Park is involved because they have their park rangers patrolling out there regularly, and Department of Public Health and a number of departments. So we've been convening the 6 city departments to really to have a more coordinated response to the growth of people living in RVs and vehicles on the lower grade highway. That did lead to a major, what they call a resolution or operation that happened about a month and a half ago, where those 2 blocks were totally cleared of RVs and other vehicles. And finally, for the first time in many months, really cleaned up and created a more sanitary and safe area. But that only lasted about a month. And even when that happened, those vehicles were just pushed to other blocks, or some of them went back to the outer Richmond. So that highlights a need for long-term solutions to this as well, including more transitional housing, more permanent supportive housing, and more safe RV parking areas that are buffered from residential areas and commercial districts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move to the next segment where each of our candidates has a chance to ask the other 2 questions. So we'll start with you, Mr. Mar, if you have a question for Mr. Engardio.
Yeah, well, this kind of goes back to housing, and particularly housing in the Sunset, which has been a contentious issue, but one of the most important issues that I think we're dealing with as a district supervisor and as a city. I have enjoyed your reading many of your columns over the years, and I recall one where you wrote about how the Sunset could be transformed into Paris, and you even in that column you even included an image, a before and after image, that reimagining single-family homes as rows of 6-story apartments. And so I guess that my question is, so as supervisor, how would you get to that image of converting single-family homes to 6-story apartments like in Paris?
So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because there's a great value in having an imagination and look. So I've been to Paris a couple times. I don't know how many of you have been to Paris, but generally when I go to Paris, I have a really nice time. I don't really notice that it's 6 stories of housing. I just remember the cafes and the nice boulevards and the trees. And so what I was trying to evoke in that column in the Examiner was we could have the spirit of Paris here. Because and I was talking about the transit corridors, when I mentioned earlier how there's some corridors with single-story retail. Well, if we had 5 or 6 stories of housing above that retail, you might not even notice it. And you would have all these wonderful cafes, and the businesses would benefit. And then you would have those elevator buildings that the residents can benefit from. So that's what that was. That was showing the vision of, even I think that you agree with, that we want to build more housing in the Sunset, and we want housing for families and middle-income teachers and seniors. And I think that picture was just a wonderful look as to how things could be. It doesn't say, oh, we're going to bulldoze the Sunset. I know people might try to accuse me of that, but absolutely not. If you can go to my website, engardio.com/housing, and you can read it for yourself. And everything's hyperlinked. All the columns I've written in the past are all there, and you can read everything and see it in the full context as to what I'm trying to talk about as far as a vision that I think everyone can be excited about, because we want our families to be able to stay in San Francisco and thrive.
Thank you. So do you have a question for Mr. Mar?
Sure. So Chesa Boudin was recalled overwhelmingly in the Sunset by some 67% of the vote. So I'm wondering, and you did appear in Stand with Chesa Boudin ads during his recall. So I'm wondering, what or who made you side against your own district and support Chesa Boudin?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make it clear on the recall elections that happened this year and even last year, that I only support a recall of a public official when there's clear misconduct by the official. So that's why I didn't support the recall of Governor Newsom, and I didn't support the school board or the DA recall this year. But I absolutely agree with and understand and agree with the sentiment that drove particularly the school board recall and the DA recall race. And I've been very much focused on those issues and real solutions to how we can support our schools and ensure that we have a high quality of education that's provided to all students and families, through the historic resources that I've been able to secure, particularly for college and career readiness programs for high school students, and also funding against science, technology, and math grants at all District 4 schools. On public safety, I've been focused on real solutions, preventing crime before it happens, the creation of the Sunset District 5-point Community Safety Plan, and then taking that citywide through the Crime Prevention through Community Policing Act.
But it's one thing to say I oppose recalls, and it's another to appear in the ads for the candidate. So you were clearly saying, I'm with this guy all the way. So that was the question. What propelled you to be with him all the way? And on school board recall, let's note too that you donated to the anti-recall. So it wasn't just I'm opposed to recalls. You were actively working to save those school board members who devastated our families.
For the district attorney recall race, I was not actively involved in either campaign on either side.
Your face is in advertisements. I stand with Chesa.
So, and then on the school board recall, again, that one, it had the added factor that those 3 school board candidates were going to be up for re-election just months later this year. It ended up costing the city general fund over $3 million to support the cost of the recall. So that's another reason why I think for fiscal responsibility, and also just to support the democratic process as a way that for us to be able to decide on key policy issues rather than through recalls.
Thanks. So you have one more question for Joel?
Yeah. Okay. Well, just kind of following up on my first question, it's about SB 50, and Senator Wiener's championed that a few years ago, and that was extremely contentious. I was a leading voice here in the city opposing SB 50 because I felt like it was bad policy, and it was this blunt upzoning that would apply to any single-family neighborhood, whether it's the Sunset District or in Fresno or Sacramento, where I grew up. And it would allow 6-story buildings on single-family homes very far from the transit corridors, kind of like the picture you had in your Examiner column about Sunset becoming Paris. So I don't think you addressed this in the previous debate, but did you support or not support SB 50 when it was proposed, and would you support it if it was proposed again?
I love these gotcha questions because he loves to cherry pick my columns in Examiner. If you look deeper in the columns, you'll see that I wrote a piece. The precursor to SB 50, I think, had a different number, maybe 837 or 827, I can't remember. But I wrote a piece actually calling out what you had just mentioned, that while it might be a great law for Los Angeles, which has lots of sprawl, and so therefore the mileage between from the transit corridor made sense, I pointed out in my column that in San Francisco, the whole city would become the transit corridor. So I did make that distinction. And so at that point, I was pointing out that I thought Scott Wiener should tailor his legislation and not a one-size-fits-all for every city across the state. So that's there as well. But SB 50 is irrelevant right now. We have right now the single-family zoning, we can put duplexes in San Francisco right now. So it's kind of a irrelevant attack, but it's okay.
Well, I think it is different. There's a difference between what SB 9 allows, which is a duplex on most single-family lots, versus what SB 50 would have allowed, which again would be a 6-story, 10 or more unit apartment building on a single-family lot away from a transit corridor. So the question is, did you support SB 50 then, and would you support it now?
Well, I think what's important is what's the goal here? Because we can argue back and forth and play gotcha, and he can try to scare voters away from me. But if you read through everything I've written as a journalist, I've been very consistent. And the goal is, how do we create housing to fit the needs of our longtime residents? And that's going to mean we're going to need some 6-story apartment buildings on transit corridors for sure. And we're going to probably need some small apartment buildings mixed in with the single family homes in our neighborhood. There's nothing wrong with that. I mentioned how I grew up with a single mom. We lived in a multifamily duplex that was in a single family home neighborhood. And who lived on the other side? Another single mom with her child. Did we ruin the character of the neighborhood because the whole row of the street was single family homes? There was one duplex in the middle? No. I would argue that us being there made the community better and we all benefited from it. So I see no problem with having sprinkling apartment buildings and duplexes and fourplexes throughout the west side and putting apartment buildings on the transit corridors. I mean, I think everyone will benefit from it. I don't think we need to use fear-mongering and scare people away from your stated goal. You started your whole discussion today about how you want San Francisco to be a place where your daughter can live. And we can only do that by building appropriate housing for our families.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now we have some audience questions. We have a microphone up here, so if you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone. And the one ground rule I would ask for this is that you ask questions as opposed to making comments. So.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. And you
okay.
can lift that up a little bit if it.
So, as a personal investor, I often see the politicians don't understand the economics that attract capital to build housing. So I'd love to hear both of you talk about what are the blockers in San Francisco that keeps people from investing in affordable housing, and what can you do to eliminate those blockers?
Well, I would say just on the question of small expansions to single-family homes, which is what I think that a lot of the focus has been on policy discussions around housing development, particularly in District 4 this last year with SB 9, and now us looking at a local fourplex legislation that could go beyond SB 9. I did want to say that regarding financing of these projects, one of the big challenges is the acquisition cost for the home, right? So for a developer who's going to pay the market rate for a single family home right now in the Sunset District, that's 1.5 million or more. It just doesn't pencil out to build 2, 3, or even 4 units from a business perspective. I mean, that's something that I've gotten to understand better through my work on these issues. That's why I've been focused on homeowners as the developer, and I think there's great potential for that. And I found that in the District 4 ADU program, pilot program that we created, and we're expanding now citywide, because a homeowner they don't have the acquisition cost for the development. They already have a lot of equity in their home, and they just need support, technical assistance, and financing to expand their homes. And there's great potential to do that, considering there's 100,000 single-family homes in the city. If we could get just 10% of them, 15% to do a duplex, we're talking about tens of thousands of units.
I think construction costs are an issue, the entitlement process, the long delays. I mean, you hear stories about how a project is waiting for approval, and in the time it takes to get the approval, the construction costs have gone up 30%, and then that no longer pencils out. So I think it's an issue of too much delay and rigmarole to get even a common sense project built.
I actually have 2 questions. The first one is that we have actually an environmental crisis in the Sunset around the 2550 Irving area. And there have been testing done. There's high levels of PCE that have been proven to be in people's houses. And because of SB 35, there is no comprehensive cleanup required. Basically CEQA is not required. So the developer is not required to do that, and the DTSC, Department of Toxicology, has taken the low road out, and so we've been abandoned, basically. So my question to both of you is that will you commit to a comprehensive cleanup at 2550 Irving, even if it means slowing down that possible affordable project that's proposed there?
Well, I think it's very important to clean up the toxic waste, because think about it. If if any developer wants to do a new project, what are people going to say? They're going to point to the previous project and say, they wouldn't even clean up the toxic waste. So it's not going to help the cause, so to speak. And I think it, and it used to be a dry cleaner, it used to be a mortuary at that location. I think if we can look, if any project comes in as a potential project, the supervisor should be able to look at the plot of land, talk to people with living memory, what used to be there. And if it was a dry cleaner, oh, red flag, that's probably got some toxic waste in the ground. And so from the very beginning, make that a part of the conversation. I feel like this project, everything went sideways because we were just reacting to things that happened after the fact versus heading it off before it became a crisis. And so I would just like to be more proactive on any development and be aware of what used to be on the site to give us clues as to whether we're going to have problems down the road so we can address it. But this project should be cleaned up for sure. The full remediation, not just a tarp or a Band-Aid.
Yes, I agree with that. And then not only do I support a comprehensive and coordinated cleanup and remediation plan for the entire block of 2,500 Irving and the surrounding homes, but I sponsored the Board of Supervisors resolution calling on DTSC to ensure that that was passed unanimously by my colleagues this spring. And I've been working closely with MSNA, the Mid-Sunset Neighborhood Association, on ensuring that we achieve that as a goal. And because affordable housing development, we absolutely need that, but we also need to ensure that our neighborhoods are safe and for our families and seniors. And actually we do have a meeting scheduled with key officials in Cal EPA and the DTSC on Friday to continue the discussions, and that's with my office, MSNA, and the key state officials that are overseeing the cleanup here.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks.
Ma'am, there are like 10 people waiting here, so if I could ask you to, if you want to
back
ask
in line.
another question, if you could go to the back of the line, sorry.
Hello, Ashish Burla. I raised my family here in San Francisco. And my question's really around a recent poll by the San Francisco Chronicle shows the San Francisco Board of Supervisors having an approval rating of 12% rating it good. I think that's actually sort of high. And I'm curious from you, Mr. Mar, are you part of the solution or are you part of the problem, and why? And for Joel, if you were elected, what are the things that you want to accomplish to turn that number around, within the first year of your tenure?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't dispute the poll, and we hear constant complaints from constituents all the time around a wide range of issues. And I know, especially during the pandemic, residents' frustration, with our city government and the state of our city has grown. I believe that I've been very responsive and focused on around issues that I have more direct control over, and particularly here in the district. And again, as I mentioned in my previous remarks, I've been very focused on working with key organizations and leaders in the Sunset on our top issues of priority, whether it's keeping our neighborhoods safe, supporting our schools, expanding housing that meets the needs of the community, and really preserving and protecting the unique quality of life that we enjoy here in the Sunset District. So I think on a citywide level, I understand the frustration, and it seems like around the big issues, whether it's housing affordability, homelessness, and others, we're not making progress, and we're going backwards on those. But I think here in the neighborhood, Sunset District 4 residents, have been actively engaged with me in working on real solutions here, local solutions in our neighborhood.
I think that 12% says everything, that the residents of San Francisco are so frustrated, so fed up, that they are really hungry for a change, because is anything better off than it was even when Gordon Mar took office? And people are out here screaming and protesting and saying, we need better schools, and our seniors are being attacked in the street, and who's being prosecuted for it, And then the supervisors, most of them, were silent, either silent on those two issues or actively encouraging the actual office holders, Stand with Chesa advertisement and donating to the anti-school board recall. So people are waking up and seeing that they want better leadership. So that's why I'm running. I'm offering a change in direction and better leadership. We need better supervisors to really fix our city.
Thank you.
Hello, Paula Katz. When SFMTA started the construction on Taraville, they put us on buses because the light rail vehicle, the Taraville, couldn't run on the streets. And we were allowed to ride the bus all the way downtown if we wanted. And when they reopened Muni Metro Tunnel, they gave us the choice to transfer the tunnel for those who wanted, but for those who wanted to stay on the bus and ride the bus all the way downtown and not have to get up and transfer and wait for the train in West Portal, they gave us that option. We were allowed to do that until July when they stopped the L bus at West Portal. So I'd like to know from you, Supervisor Mar, what are you doing to try to get the L bus route to the Embarcadero resumed, and to make sure that when the El Taraville train comes back in 2024, if we're lucky, it will run all the way downtown in the tunnel and we won't have to get off at West Portal. And for you, Mr. Engardio, what would you do? First of all, would you fight for both of those? And what would you do to accomplish that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Paula. And around the very frustrating experience that the Parkside residents have had with MTA around the El Taraville project. I think you didn't even mention the earlier frustration where it was even worse, where they 2 years ago, I think it was, they were going to require folks from the outer Parkside to transfer at Taraville and Sunset Boulevard, and then make another transfer at West Portal just to get downtown. So at that time, I supported the community on pushing back on MTA, and we were able to get them to back off of that. But then now we are in the situation where they went ahead and implemented this change back in July, where they end the L bus service at West Portal and force a transfer there, and that's really inconvenient and could be unsafe for seniors and people with disabilities. So I've been working to push MTA to restore the full service on the L line all the way from the Parkside and to downtown, and so those conversations are progressing, and I think we're going to be able to have a positive announcement about that, about restoration of that service very soon.
Would it be for all the buses or just some buses during the course of the day?
Right now, the main constraint that MTA has is staffing and operator availability. So I think that's going to be the key factor, is whether they can have enough bus drivers or operators. Actually, it's bus drivers now for the L to do it. They just had MTA graduated a class of new bus drivers last week. So I think that's going to help.
And have you had any discussions about when the El Taraville itself resumes, whether we'll be able to ride the El Taraville train all the way down into the tunnel to the Embarcadero?
Yeah, that's even the bigger issue, right? Is MTA leadership. Once the L streetcar returns, they plan to stop it at West Portal and then have it be connected to the K line and go out to City College. And force a transfer again at West Portal. So there's been no community outreach and opportunity for public input on that plan. So I've insisted with MTA that we have a real meaningful community input process before they move ahead with that change.
And the community will organize.
Yes, I know you will.
Ride back. And what about you, Joel?
Yeah, and I want to say that an important role of the supervisor is to be your advocate. And we all want to support public transportation. It's very necessary, but we want to make sure that we don't lose sight in making it efficient and making it work better. We don't lose sight of the most vulnerable users, which would be seniors and disabled people. We want to make sure that you have the dignity and convenience of being able to ride one seat all the way to your destination without having to get on and off. So yes, I would definitely be your advocate for that.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. My wife and I are normal.
Could you give your name, sir?
My name is Jim. My wife and I are normal SF residents. She works in healthcare, I work in IT networking. And we didn't get interested in the supervisor's race until my own daughter had to enter high school. And so I'm glad you brought up Lowell High School. You know, we visit Illinois every year, and my daughter came to me and said, "Dad, why do we live in this screwed up city? Why do I have to compete to get into Lowell from SFUSD Middle School, only to have the board pull it all away from me and make it a lottery admissions? Why don't we just move to Illinois? Things are so much easier there." I don't have any response to her, but I would like to ask you, Joel, and I would like to ask you, Gordon. When you say that you're going to make life easier for folks like my wife and I and my daughter, why should I believe you? Thank you.
Well, I'll answer. I guess he asked me first. So,
Go. Yeah.
well, when it comes to Lowell, I actually did a lot to fight for restoring merit back to Lowell High School, even before the school board recall started. And merit has returned to Lowell because we recalled the school board, and a newly configured school board reinstated it. So I think that was an issue that was very important to a lot of families. I think we should improve all schools. We should have more than one Lowell, but I think if your child is excelling in a certain academic area, then we should encourage that and not discourage it. You know, if your kid wants to take algebra in the 8th grade, we should do whatever we can to make that happen. So I think it's important that we support families and provide what they want out of public school. Because the danger is, like I think you alluded to, is if the families aren't getting what they want and need, they're just going to leave. They're going to go to private school or leave the city. And that's not good for our public schools. We need robust, healthy public schools. And it's not going to happen if 30 or 40% of potential customers, parents, families are opting out of it. So that's not good. We need to make sure that we're providing good public schools that parents can trust.
Yeah, and I just wanted to respond, Jim, that, you know, Lowell High School is very personal to me. My daughter's a senior there right now, so I absolutely support maintaining Lowell as one of the most successful public academic high schools, not just in San Francisco, but in the state and the country. And I was very vocal and advocate against the school board's decision when they made lottery admissions permanent, you know, illegally, it turned out. And I've been strongly supporting maintaining Lowell, but also addressing the real issues there too. I was at a meeting at Lowell 2 weeks ago with the new superintendent, where we met with leaders from a bunch of the student groups there, the student of color groups, the LGBTQ student group, and others, and they were raising a lot of serious concerns about issues at Lowell, particularly for marginalized students that have not been adequately addressed by the administration and the district. So I also believe we can maintain Lowell as this incredibly successful academic high school, while also addressing issues for marginalized students.
My daughter feels marginalized.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. And then additionally, I think, you know, as Joel said, we can't look at Lowell as in isolation. We have to look at how we can improve high schools, you know, throughout the city, how we can expand the academic resources that are really concentrated at Lowell right now, to more schools. And so I've been working on that again with my focus on allocating city funding, $8 million, to expand college and career readiness programs at all the high schools. And so I think that has to be a key part of the solution as well.
Thank you. My daughter feels marginalized by the existing administration. Her shot at Lowell was ruined.
What I don't understand about the Lowell situation, you say you favor merit at Lowell, but where were you? The parents were organizing, fighting, trying to get it back. Like, where were you? And you endorsed Allison Collins when she ran for school board. Everyone knew her whole point was to get rid of merit at Lowell. So why did you choose to endorse Allison Collins when there were plenty of other really qualified candidates like John Tresvina and Michelle Parker and Phil Kim? Like, you chose Allison Collins.
So when the school board, you know, was moving to that, their decision to end merit-based admissions at Lowell, I was actively working with parent groups and the community and also school board members on trying to prevent that and find and I was pushing for them to go through a more inclusive and thoughtful process on how the issues around diversity and school climate impacting marginalized students at Lowell can be addressed in a more comprehensive way than just the rash attempt to change the the admission criteria for Lowell. So I was very much active in that and working closely with parent groups.
But not for the recall, Lowell would still be a lottery. And you opposed so like Lowell could not be merit-based if we didn't recall those members. So like there's a disconnect here in what you say and what you did. So I just want to point that out.
Okay, we can move to the next question.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Murphy. And this is kind of a question for both of you, but in obviously two parts because you have two different roles. Supervisor Mar, I understand that you were recently involved in the support of the unionized restaurant workers strike at San Francisco International, who have been working without a contract for 3 years and are currently making $17.05 an hour. And my caveat to that is if an hourly wage ends in a nickel, that it's probably insufficient. Could you explain why you believe it was worth getting involved in the rally and the things that happened after, where several officials were arrested? And if you continue to support the restaurant workers if they go out on strike? And for you, Mr. Engardio, what is your position on organized labor, and will you support the the airport restaurant workers if they go out on strike for better wages? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Elizabeth. So yeah, just to make sure everybody knows, I participated in a protest or a labor protest at SFO last Friday, where the food service workers who work in all the different food, the restaurants and food concessions at the airport were protesting their lack of a raise since 2018, and also just challenges in getting fair treatment and being rehired coming out of the pandemic. And so I was invited to participate, by the union, and I was happy to participate in that action to show my support as an elected official for fair treatment of our service workers at the restaurants at the airport. It was part of, and it's connected to my history, prior to joining the Board of Supervisors as a labor and a community organizer for 25 years in the city, where I do believe, workers, and especially our low-paid service workers, do need support from our leaders in their efforts to improve their working conditions. And that protest did lead in an arrest. I was arrested along with a couple dozen of the workers and other supporters, and I was happy to do that to show my strong support for their action. And I think to me it really highlights, as we look at recovering from the pandemic, the difficulties of the past two plus years, we do need to ensure that we're lifting up everybody, and as our economy comes back, and we don't go back to San Francisco being ground zero for income inequality, in the country.
And I'm a big supporter of labor. I actually worked in 2 unions. I was part of the Communication Workers Union and also the Pacific Media Guild, the freelance union, when I was writing my column in the Examiner. And I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan, a big UAW town. So I worked in a fast food restaurant, McDonald's. I worked at Red Lobster. So I understand the need, and I support the collective bargaining. I support the ability to strike. I think it's important to have a living wage. So I'll always be a big supporter of workers.
I'll be quick. My name is Ron Mandel. I live here in the Parkside. You both spoke about the need for more housing in our neighborhood. There's a development that's proposed right across the street here, and I would love to hear both of your opinion on how you feel about that development and why.
Yeah, I can start. So you're referring to the Sloat Garden Center project that's literally across the street here. That for everyone, I think most people are probably aware of it because it's unprecedented for District 4 and really on the west side outside of Park Merced. And so it's proposed to be 12 stories, 400 units, luxury condo, although it does have 30% below market rate ownership units. So I think that's the positive of it. But I guess my perspective on that right now, it's another example of a development here in the neighborhood and really in our city that's just driven by profit and greed by the developers. And they're not building housing that really meets the needs of our city and our community. And that's housing for families, seniors, and moderate income households, because that's what's really been missing and hasn't been built. So, and also it would just be similar to the Westerly, which is right next door to it. And again, that project they completed construction 3 years ago. It's still largely unsold, those condos, and the commercial space is all vacant. But this new project is proposing to be the Westerly ×8, just if you go by the unit count. So I have serious concerns about that. And I've been in discussions with the developer about reimagining that project in a way that could better meet the community needs, including creating housing for older adults here in the Sunset District on the west side that might be interested in an opportunity to downsize in the neighborhood and then free up their home for a new family, because that's what my mom was able to do in Sacramento. And I see that there are a lot of potential for that strategy and projects like that to be targeting older homeowners that might want to downsize.
Yeah, it's worth noting that's the garden center across the street, and the building that we're sitting in right now, the Great Irish Cultural Center, for its future, it's going to be torn down and rebuilt, I think, at 6 stories, so it can survive for the next 50 years. And so that's in the works. So I think this area is going to see a lot of change in the coming years, and it's an opportunity, I think, to make sure that change really fits the needs of the community and the residents and the Sunset as a whole. And so I think it's, like as Supervisor Mar said, that proposed project has 30% affordable housing units. It is one good sign about it. But I think it's be important to work with the developer and work with the Irish Cultural Center, maybe find a way that these two projects can work in concert with each other so everyone benefits. So I do see opportunity to kind of hash it out.
I'm a long-term resident of the neighborhood, 50 years. I know that you have a very strong endorsement, and you've mentioned Scott Wiener many, many times. I've heard you speak and seen what you've written, and you respect him highly. He is the main proponent of much of the housing laws that seem to want to fast-track housing, and putting the blame really on discretionary review, which is where public and neighbors have a voice, and getting rid of environmental review. And that's almost in every one of his major legislations statewide. He is the leader of that pack there. I want to know what your plan is for affordable housing. I didn't hear you talk about it, both of you, but especially you.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
in town.
thanks for asking that.
If I could also say, the question of discretionary review is an important one. So do you support that also?
Well, first I just want to talk about the affordable housing. I think we need to define what does affordable mean, and we might need to change the definition, because we need to make sure that middle income families can stay in San Francisco. That's been my mantra the entire time, and all the articles I've written about. It's like, how do we get families to stay in San Francisco? If you're a firefighter and a teacher, your combined salary, you're probably you're making over $100,000. So we should have housing that affordable is defined in that price, that salary, because otherwise, if we focus only on extremely low income and the luxury market rate, and we forget about the missing middle, that's not helping our families. And so it's important that our housing focuses on the missing middle. And those 6-story buildings, apartment buildings that we were talking about, really fits the missing middle. It's the family housing, the 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom housing that people need. So that's what I'm focused on.
And discretionary review, do you support it?
Yeah, well, CEQA, like anything, can have a really good intention and then over time be abused. So I'm not saying we get rid of review, but we have to get rid of the abuse of the review, because you had talked about the democracy and losing local control. The governor is threatening us to take away our local control. I don't want that to happen. So we need to do what we can to make sure that it's not taken away. So there is a place for review, absolutely. Just can't be abused.
Yeah, I would say that I do support discretionary review. I think it is important, particularly environmental review on major development projects.
Right, and I don't think, to clarify, nobody is talking about eliminating environmental review, right? I mean, that's a red herring.
Actually, that is
No,
part
they're trying to they're reducing the amount of environmental review.
and I think that the Sloat Garden Center project is a great example of that, where I think it absolutely needs to be subject to full environmental review because the scale of the project is unprecedented. It's being built on sand dunes, basically, and it's also in the coastal zone, according to our plan. So yes, but I think if we are going to give up discretionary review and streamline projects, there needs to be significant community benefits, in exchange for that, and it shouldn't be done just for any especially any luxury condo development.
My name is Judy Parks. I have I have a couple of things to say, but I'm very disappointed in both of you for supporting Jay and not I. We want our park back. But my question is, the homeless, the campers on the Great Highway, I'm really shocked that you can put up a little plastic rope and put up cones and they go away. And as soon as you take down that little plastic tape and the cones, they come back, and they're back now more than ever. Where did they go, and why we have signs that say no parking overnight, but they stay there, so nobody's enforcing the law? How does that happen, that this little plastic tape and cones, they leave, and as soon as that plastic tape and cones come down, they come back? How does that happen?
Yeah.
How strong, what power does that little plastic rope have that causes that?
Yeah, just on that, because I was very involved in getting the 6 city departments to do that major operation that happened about 5 weeks ago that cleared off those 2 blocks, and then they put the no parking cones and tape there, and that was effective for about 4 weeks. It wasn't so much the cones and the tape were there to prevent people from coming back, but it was really the threat of enforcement that allowed the city departments to clear those 2 blocks, so that's what got those 2 blocks cleared. But it didn't really solve anything because they just moved a block or 2 away, and again, some of them moved back out to the outer Richmond, so that's why we absolutely need to address situations like that are causing serious public safety and public health impacts on the neighborhood. So that was very much justified, but it doesn't. But strong enforcement efforts like what happened 5 weeks ago don't really solve the problem, and they just shifted around to different blocks. In fact, there was one RV that I think moved over to near where I live, near Stern Grove. So that's why we need longer term solutions. I am supportive of the creation of a safe RV parking site here.
You're not going to put it at the zoo, are you? That's what I hear.
No, and right now I think it's been public. The Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing has not wanted to reveal the sites that are being considered because they're not fully vetted, but it's been public now that the one site that at least I visited with them and others is at SF State. It's a vacant, underutilized parking lot over at SF State. That's what's being looked at right now. And that would be a good site because it's right near where there's the other major RV encampment on the west side, and that's on Lake Merced Boulevard and Winston Drive. They could literally drive right off the street into that parking lot if the agreement can be reached with SF State.
Well, I just want to say that we worked really hard to get those signs up, and they got all the campers out 4 years ago, and they weren't there until recently. And I don't know why the signs worked for all those years, and now they're not working anymore. That's very baffling to me.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you very much to our candidates for a very interesting discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you.